Good afternoon. Once again, we welcome you all to this second day of this international conference on language, literature, stylistics, and translation studies 2020. After a good lunch, a session like this is little hard, and that too on online presence. Whereas we would support you like that you may not fall in sleep. We have two eminent speakers to speak to us today. Dr. Silimananda, Deputy Director, IGNO, for the International Affairs. Earlier, she served in Delhi and now in Odisha as Deputy Director, IGNO. Madam will be speaking to all of us. And we have our eminent professor, Dr. Francisco from University of Hawaii at Hilo, and he will be speaking to us. Hope you'll all get benefited, enriched, enlightened by these talks. Yesterday, in spite of small delays, you all have cooperated well, and we could able to have a successful day yesterday. And today, we do have paper presentations and in parallel sessions, and as the timetable for today served on the WhatsApp groups, 2 tracks will happen after these talks. After the talks, we have a small interaction session with the speakers, and there we will update you about the paper presentation sessions. Our intention, our motive of organizing these conferences is to impart and inculcate the best academic values that we can. Yesterday, we had a wonderful session. In spite there were some technical issues in the beginning, you all have supported as well. And it's not like since we have to do a conference, but you can see from the panel of speakers, we had this motive is to do the best that we all can together take the academics high and more higher. And this morning, with the same spirit and with all your support, we would love to move further. Yesterday we had some technical issues and some disturbance was there, but you all could able to cope up and be with us. And today, I hope that will not happen, and till now everything is fine and everything will be in control. And being today, after the last presentations, we'll have an formal concluding remarks. Then, as promised, all soft copy certificates will be served hopefully by the evening, and also respectively the proceedings and what all you are entitled for. And to add, we wanted to act as just only as facilitators, as today publication in Scopus journals has become so important. Like we got associated with few journals, and we shall be sharing in the WhatsApp group, and those interested who would like to take the support can do so after seeing the information, maybe till next Saturday, that is 15th August. You may send your full papers, and if you are sending for full papers for Scopus journals, and those papers will be sent to the respective journals, and upon the acceptance you may have to pay the respective charges of the journal levied by the journal, and we will be only acting as facilitators. And coming to our part, we have 8 international research journals. They are peer reviewed, and we have online presence and also in print, whereas we extend the online publication at free of cost for all those who have participated into this conference. And if you are interested, so you may also send your papers by next Saturday, specifying that you wanted to publish in IMRF peer reviewed journals. We also extend publication in the form of ISBN books, your papers as chapters, and those chapters are counted in every evaluating system. So those interested may also contact our admin team, and we are happy to help you. And there are many academic things that we can share, where you can support, where we can support. Let's all join hands to work together to support each other for collective learning, and to leave and to set an example for our young generations. And I have many things to tell to you, whereas as time permits me, I'll be back again. And now we shall move further for the further proceedings. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, esteemed speakers from India and abroad, dignitaries and participants of the academic fraternity. I feel so honored to have been invited by Dr. Ratnakar, the conference chairman, and the man behind this great event to deliver my plenary lecture in the International Conference on Language, Literature, Stylistics, and Translation Studies, organized by IMRF. The title of my address is Trends in Translation, Past, Present, and Future. In the contemporary world, translation has become so relevant that people visualize it as a socio-cultural bridge between communities and countries. In my address, I have made a review of the development of translation from the past to the present, discussing its different stages. From the oral phase of the historic times, it has reached the stage of automation, where no longer translation is considered as an art. Rather, it has transformed as an industry, incorporating complex computational tools, making the process of translation faster, digitized, cheaper, and accessible to all. I think now the time is fortunate enough, propitious to make translation for disseminating literature among the different groups of people, among the different languages, not only in this, not only in India, but also internationally, because now the best medium for everything is the online platform. And in a way, COVID 19, though a pandemic, has kept us indoors, but now everyone is mentally very, very active. Everyone has started joining webinars, contributing their ideas, suggestions, thoughts, and it is a beautiful platform for interaction among the scholars, solidifying the fraternity of the academia. Now let me go to the slides. The topic is translation, past, present, and future. Translation, if you look at translation, it is as old as the human civilization. Since the dawn of civilization, we human beings have been using language to translate our thoughts and ideas. The story of translation dates back to the third millennium BC. The Babylon of Hammurabi's day, that is 2100 BC, was a polyglot city, and much of the official business of the empire was made possible by writers who translated edicts into various languages. In India, too, our first writers were the translators. Free translations and adaptations of great epics like Ramayana and the Mahabharata have shaped Indian literature in a big way. Until the 19th century, Indian literature consisted mainly of translations, adaptations, interpretations, and retellings. Translations of literary works and knowledge texts like on medicine, astronomy, metallurgy, travel, shipbuilding, architecture, philosophy, religion, and poetics from Sanskrit, Pali, Prakrit, Persian, and Arabic enhanced our awareness of the world. In the Indian scenario, the role of translation is very significant as it is the home to people speaking 22 recognized languages and hundreds of mother tongue and dialects. We can say that India would not have been a nation without translation, as we use translation to communicate, and communication, in fact, keeps us united. It is present everywhere, from the electronic media to print, from national to international, vice versa, and national to regional, vice versa. One may frankly say that it is necessary at every stage of our career and life because in the world of science and technology, one has to know more than two languages. Also, translation as a discipline is an attractive and lucrative domain for job seekers and researchers. And in the global market, translators are now in a great demand. Next slide. Now coming to derivation of the word translation. The English word translation is derived either from the Old French translation or more directly from the Latin translatio, that is transporting, and coming from the participle of the verb transfer, to carry over. In the field of languages, translation today has several meanings. It is studied as a subject, as a product, and as a process. Roman Jacobson, a leading linguist and noted expert in the subject of translation, defines translation to quote, the interpretation of verbal signs by means of some other language. Unquote. Through this process of translation, texts in one language are transformed into texts in another language with the same meaning. Oxford University defines translation as the process of translating words or text from one language into another. The Cambridge Dictionary also endorses this. This encompasses word-to-word rendering of the text from one language to another or replacing the equivalent of the words or phrases from one text to another. If you look at the process of translation, we find that there are two different written languages, one involving an original written text, that is the source text, in the source language, or SL into a written text, into a written target text, that is a target in the target language. While translating, a translator discovers the meaning of a text behind the forms in the source language and reproduces the same meaning in the target language with the forms and structures available in the target language. A successful translator is not a mechanical translator of a text. She or he puts in his or her creativity to the fullest extent and goes into the soul of the content. While translating, a translator takes into account lexical, grammatical structure, and cultural context of the text in the source language to understand the meaning built in the text and then transfers the same meaning to the text in the target language. When text in a foreign language is translated into a local language, we are required to impart a local flavor to suit the needs of the local reader. Sorry. This is called domestication. On the other hand, when we are translating a text for a global audience from a local language into a foreign or international language, we need to take into account the cultural setup where we expect the translated text to be accepted, and this is called foreignization. While deciding the target group, it's necessary to take into account the age group, mental level, intellectual maturity, and the level of exposure to the content being translated. If we are translating a book on discoveries and inventions for small children, I'm giving an example, we need not give the technical details of the discoveries and inventions, but it will be mandatory for us to give these details if our focus shifts from the school children to university students or the researchers. After a work has been translated, it has to be published either in the printed form or in the digital form as is done on a website. The format of the text should match with the medium where it is to be published. If the book has to be brought out in the printed format, it has to be formatted accordingly to match one of the designs available in the market. Similarly, for publishing a translated document on the website, all technical formalities and requirements are to be met so that it can be easily published on a website. To quote A. Duff, the critic, translation implies that we have the capacity to enter into the mind of the world and the culture of the speakers or writers, and we can express their thought in a manner that is not only parallel to the original but also acceptable to the target language. We need to be faithful and loyal to the original text in the act of translation, and it is necessary to focus more on ideas and concepts than its surface meaning of the text. So it's very necessary that the translators should be ethical, should follow the ethical procedures of translation. The work of translation requires a theoretical knowledge and understanding of the source text, and translators are required to maintain a compact relationship between the two domains of knowledge. Now, coming to the stages of translation, there are different stages. One is the literal translation, which is the first stage of translation where you simply transfer the words from one language to another. We resort to this kind of translation when we want the reader in the target language to simply understand the overall meaning of the text in the source language. Next comes literary translation, which makes the world literature available in regional languages and takes the literature in the regional languages to the audience across the world. So here we can refer to the classics translated into different languages. Then comes knowledge translation, which covers the National Translation Mission launched to translate textbooks, classical works in Indian languages so as to raise the standard of education in the respective Indian languages. Media translation encompasses industries in the print, electronic, visual, auditory media like newspaper, magazines, radio, regional languages for wide viewership. Finally comes machine translation or the computer aided translation, which has shown increasing capabilities of efficacy as a consequence of which the translators have learned to use machine translation as a tool to accelerate their work, and this is increasingly used by people across the world to meet the demands and challenges of the global market. Next, we come to the next slide. That is the historical review. From the historic angle, when we study translation in India, we find that the linguist Harish Trivedi divides Indian literature translated in English into four categories, and they are the Indological phase, and this phase consists of literature written in Sanskrit or Pali, in ancient and medieval era, and it is translated into English. Neo-Orientalist or Post-Orientalist phase, which includes the Bhakti-Kal text translated into English. National allegory, and in this phase, the translation of the realistic writers like Munshi Premchand occur. Finally, internationalism or universalism, where the modern writers are translated into English. We have another linguist, famous linguist, G.N. Devi, who has contributed immensely to translation studies. He divides history of translation into four parts in his book, In Another Tongue, Essays on English Literature. And he divides the history into four phases. One is the colonial phase from 1776 to 1910, the revivalist phase from 1876 to 1950, the nationalist phase from 1902 to 1929, and the formalist phase from 1912 onwards. The great moment for translation in India was in 1750 during the colonial period under the guidance of Warren Hastings, who was the governor of Bengal. He encouraged the young officers and merchants to understand Indian languages in order to be successful in commerce and trade. Charles Wilkins published Sanskrit Grammar in 1779. He is considered the first Englishman to learn Sanskrit. He translated Bhagavad Gita in 1785, and this is the first Sanskrit text available in English through translation. John Marshall translated Samveda from Bengali to English, Bhagavad Purana from Persian to English. He played a great role in establishing printing in Indian languages. William Jones founded the Asiatic Society of Bengal in 1784 to understand Indian culture, and he translated Kalidas's Sakuntala, Geet Govind, Manusmriti, and the Hitopadesh into English. William Jones is believed to be the founder of Indology. These translations were done in order to make the British officers familiar with the Indian culture who came to India to colonize. Omar Khayyam was one of the most famous and beloved Persian poets of the Middle Ages, and his translation of the Rubaiyat from Persian into English was undertaken in 1859 by Edward J. Fitzgerald. Coming, looking at the Indian context, we find Raja Ramon Rai, 1772 to 1833. He was known as the morning star of Indian Renaissance and was greatly influenced by the liberal outlook of the colonizers. He translated Upanishads into English in 1830s. Similarly, Indian translators like Ramesh Chandra Dutt translated Indian classic texts like Ramayana, Mahabharata, and Rig Veda into English. Bankim Chandra's novels, Anand Math in 1882 in particular, was translated into most of the major Indian languages. Rabindranath Tagore translated the poems of Kabir, and realizing the hegemonic status of English language, he translated his own poems in Gitanjali from Bengali to English, for which he received the Nobel Prize in 1913. Sir Aurobindo, Sri Aurobindo translated Gita in the colonial era and Vidyapati in 1956. Translation from one Indian language to another Indian language was very rare just after the independence, even though in the post-colonial period there were translations from Indian languages into English. Some significant translations during this period were sponsored by the UNESCO, and under its aegis, translation project was executed from 1948 to about 2005. The purpose of the project was to translate masterpieces of the world literature into English and French. Foremost among them are Vibhuti Bhushan Bandyopadhyay's Bengali novel Pather Panchali, known worldwide for its film version by Satyajit Ray, Manik Bandyopadhyay's Bengali novel The Prophet's Tale, Munshi Premchand's Hindi novel Godan, and Ajit Ahmed's Urdu novel The Shore and the Wave. A.K. Ramanujan, R. Parthasarathi, and Arun Kolatkar translated their own works in English. In the neo-colonial era of globalized capitalism of the 80s, the market, the business of translation emerged. So, consequently, many publishing houses started translation projects like the Penguin Books in India in the mid 1980s. Among the many success stories of Penguin, the most notable are the short stories and novellas of Satyajit Ray from Bengali, beginning with Adventures of Feluda and then running into several other volumes. Nisam Sahane's novel Tamas from Hindi, classic Telugu short stories edited by Rangarao, all of which went on to become the bestsellers and have registered steady sales ever since they were published. Penguin's foray into translation promoted other publishers like the Rupa and Company, which later tied up with HarperCollins, Seagull Books of Kolkata, to expand their corpus in translation. The most ambitious and systematic project of translating Indian novels into English was launched by Macmillan India Limited in 1996 in a series called Modern Indian Novels in English Translation. By now, it has published more than 100 novels. These translations are accompanied by an elaborate editorial apparatus, a scholarly introduction by a critic of the original language, a translator's note, and an elaborate glossary as footnote. Some of these novels have already been put on the syllabi of universities in India and abroad. Gayatri Chakrabarty Spivak, the famous literary critic, scholar, and professor at Columbia University, has translated a number of stories by Mahasweta Devi. Thus, in 1990s, translation studies finally came into its own, but this proved to be the decade of its global expansion. Once perceived as a marginal activity, translation began to be seen as a fundamental act of human exchange. Today, interest in the field of translation is taking place alongside an increase in its practice all over the world. That institutions like the National Book Trust, Bharatiya Anuvad Parisad, University Publication, Central Institute of Indian Languages are playing significant roles in breaching the career barriers and creative dialogue through translation. And more recently, with the help of National Translation Mission under the Ministry of MHRD, Government of India, there is a kind of boom in translation. Translation is at the center of the intellectual climate of the time. When we talk specifically about translation of novels, it seems that novels, which are considered as the major vehicle of cultural transmission, have declined in importance in recent times to pave the way for a new activity that is becoming popular, and that is the translation of Indian language fiction into English. Earlier, Bengali novels were translated into other regional languages. It is true that some of the most significant novels in each of our regional languages virtually untranslatable because of the local difference and use of colloquial language and dialect that suffered attenuation when translated in English, but may not suffer as drastically when translated into another Indian language. So we find this is the barrier for translating novels from regional languages into English. I can talk about a famous poet from Odisha, Upendra Bhanjan, and he has composed his poems in such a colloquial way and in such a tight metrical structure that I think in future also it would be very difficult to translate them into English. We can also take this Tarasankar Bandyopadhyay's Hansuli Rankir Upakatha, 1947, which has never been translated into English. Similarly, Mahaswita Devi, the famous novelist, Bangla novelist, Auranger Adhikar, which is still not available in English but has been translated in Hindi, Telugu, and few other Indian languages. Thus, the totality of our fictions available in English translation may be an infinitesimal fraction of what actually exists in any of the major languages of India. If we look at the reality, we find that in translation there are two comparable trends. One is Indian novels written in English and Indian novels translated into English, and the asymmetry in their reception is evident. Novelists who choose to write in English attract international media attention. Their books sell in other countries as well as in India. You take the example of Vikram Seth, Amit Chaudhary, Rohinton Mistry, Arundhati Ray, Bharti Mukherjee. Books also display new novels in English prominently, but in order to find the translated ones in regional language, one has to make efforts to find some old and dusty copies, maybe left on the book racks of the shops. If we explore deeply, we find that the novelists in the Indian language focus more on the local issues, as a result of which the target readership spread across the world find no interest as they're unfamiliar with such milieux. The intricate tensions of community, religion, caste, language, region, and class assume a greater immediacy in the Indian novels, and the essence of Indianness is seldom addressed. Thus, the fate of the Indian novel in English and the Indian novel in English translation perhaps would continue to be dissimilar in the global market also in future. With the emergence of globalization, privatization, and liberalization, the world has now become like a village. The internet, new technology, machine translation, and the emergence of a worldwide multi-million dollar translation industry have dramatically altered the complex relationship between translators, language, and power. Thus, any ism would begin or end, but this translation would go on. Translation is necessary for democratization of knowledge, social harmony, and peace in the new world integrated by technology and economy. Today, the fame of Shakespeare still shines. You know why? Because his works have been translated into regional languages and his message of universalism has reached the masses. Many of his works have been adapted for films and TV shows. At present, translation has grown as an independent discipline known as translatology. The scope and space of translation is inherent not only in India but also in the world due to globalization. Technology has already brought about significant changes in the language service industry, and apps like Google Translate, Skype's translation program, computer-aided translation tools, instant communication, translation memories, exhaustive glossaries, etc., which are examples of how technology has made the translators' lives easier in the last 2 decades. The future of translation perhaps would be a mix of intelligent tools and subject matter experts working together who would deliver accurate readings for under competitive prices. Embracing change, is a part of progress. So we also need to start implementing new technologies to take translation studies to the next level and positively to a higher level. I thank all the participants I thank Dr. Ratnakar for giving me this wonderful opportunity to address you all. And finally, a big thank you to all of you.
Hi everyone, thank you for attending my talk. And before I'm going to present my paper, I'd like to thank first the organizing committee of the International Conference on Language, Literature, and Translation Studies 2020 for inviting me as one of the speakers of this conference. It's an honor for me to present and share my research to all the attendees of this conference. Before I'm going to start my presentation, I'd like to introduce myself first. I am Dr. Francisco Dumanig, an Assistant Professor of English at the University of Hawaii at Hilo. I'm a former senior lecturer at the Faculty of Languages and Linguistics at the University of Malaya in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. And I also taught previously in several universities in the Philippines, Malaysia, and the Middle East. My current research focuses on the family language policy of Filipinos in Hawaii, education and language in the Philippines, and caregivers' interaction with elderly patients in adult residential care homes. I publish some research articles in peer-reviewed journals such as Cambridge Language Teaching Journal, Journal of Multilingual and Multicultural Development, World English's Multilingual Language Policy, and International Journal of Bilingual Education and Bilingualism. My areas of expertise are teaching English as a second or foreign language, global Englishes, and Southeast Asian Englishes, discourse analysis, focusing more particularly on language and identity, language planning and language policy, and social linguistics. My presentation today is about the impact of culture in teaching English as a foreign language and focusing more on the perspective of the non-native English teachers. Before I'm going to proceed to the content of this presentation, I'd like to show you first the outline of this presentation. First, I'm going to discuss on the direction of the study, followed by language and culture. Then I'm going to present to you the intercultural language learning, which is the theoretical framework of this research, and English language teaching in Oman because we got the data from Oman. And I'm going to discuss with you the methodology, then followed by the results and analysis. Then I'll be showing to you the pedagogical implications of this research. This study would like to explore how non-native English language teachers integrate culture in teaching English as a foreign language, and it also examines the teacher's beliefs as to what culture is deemed helpful in achieving a better learning experience of students studying English as a foreign language. In this research, I'm really interested to know whether the target language culture may influence more the learners to learn English as a foreign language or as a second language, or it can be the learners' culture that may influence more in their learning of English as a second language or as a foreign language, or it can be the teacher's culture. We know that language is really essential and it is important in teaching and learning. And in fact, it is used as a tool for human communication. And it is also considered as complex because it is open, dynamic, energetic, constantly evolving, and personal. Since language is used to communicate and to interact with people, we could say that language is a social practice where it is used as a form of or as a tool to communicate and socially interact with others, which means that one of its roles is meaning making and interpretation, which goes beyond vocabulary and grammar. And we can also say that language can be used to create and construct meaning through the process of communication. So here we see how language plays a very important role in communication, in learning, and in teaching as well. Language and culture always go together. Part of the culture is language and part of the language is culture. Culture is a framework where people live their lives and communicate shared meanings with each other. It forms our beliefs, it conveys our ideas, and shares knowledge and customs and values which are communicated through language. So you see here how language plays an important role in creating the culture. So culture is also essential in meaning making and interpretation of meaning. And remember that when language is used and communicated, it is always interpreted or understood depending on the cultural understanding of the receiver. Therefore, teaching and learning must bring the learners to their own understanding of their own culture in order for them to enhance their intercultural understanding as they continually engage with others through communication. So here you can see the link between language and culture and their importance in communication, particularly in teaching and learning. It is important to note here that it is essential for the learners to understand first their own culture before they can be effective in intercultural communication. So, based on those ideas, we can say that language and culture are strongly linked together, where the language used is dictated by its cultural values. And to learn the culture, it requires language to transmit attitudes, ideas, and values from one generation to another. So, in order for you to transmit, the culture from one generation to the other, then you need language. Language is used as a tool. And so therefore, in learning a second or foreign language does not only require the linguistic form or the linguistic competence of the learners, but it also needs familiarity of the culture. It is evident that integrating culture in a language classroom can be an effective method to enhance the learner's knowledge of the target language. However, it remains a question on what culture is taught by non-native English teachers to their foreign language learners. This study explores whether non-native English language teachers integrate the English culture or their own culture or the learner's culture in teaching English as a foreign language. This further examines a teacher's beliefs as to how culture is deemed helpful in achieving a better learning experience of students. Globalization has increased the movements of people from one place to another. coupled with technological development, accessibility to communicate and interact with people in almost all parts of the world, are quicker and convenient. Such globalization and technological advancement also increases the importance of English for global communication. With these developments, it also affects the teaching and learning of English, either as a second language or as a foreign language. Being able to communicate globally, cultural understanding becomes an essence in language learning. Language can be learned easily when it is coupled with cultural understanding. The teaching of English then must be intercultural because learners need to understand the culture of other speakers. Several varieties of English are emerging, and when learners are exposed to this group of people, they need to be linguistically and culturally competent. This paper is anchored from the concept of intercultural language learning, or ICLL, which argues that the learning of a language involves developing with learners an understanding of their own language and culture in relation to an additional language and culture. It is a dialogue that allows for reaching a common ground for negotiation to take place, and where variable points of view are recognized, mediated, and accepted. Intercultural language learning highlights the importance of learners' understanding of their culture and of their own language and the target language in order to make connections between their own culture and the cultures of others. Learners engaged in intercultural language learning develop a reflective stance towards language and culture, both specifically as instances of first, second, and additional languages and cultures, and generally as understandings of the variable ways in which language and culture exist in the world. Learners need to understand how their values, beliefs, and social practices affect the way they use their own language and eventually explore the cultural influences of the target language. This notion basically argues that learners must develop their intercultural competence to better understand the similarities and differences of how their language is used as compared to the target language. Culture shapes the way language is structured and used. It is also through intercultural language learning that it enhances the learner's communicative competence both in oral and written discourses. Since this paper examines the non-native English teachers' perspectives on the importance of culture in English language teaching, so we collected the data from Oman, where most of the English teachers are coming from Asian countries and some other Arab countries, and with few teachers coming from the native English speaking countries. So I would just want to provide you a background knowledge about the English language teaching in Oman. So we know that English continues to be the most widely used language in many parts of the world. With the emergence of globalization, the demand of English continues to rise. Consequently, the speakers and the varieties of English continue to increase. In Oman, the importance of English is gaining more popularity. As a result, it is introduced as a subject in schools, colleges, and universities. According to Al-Busaidi, the use of English in Oman has become an institutionalized domain, which is used in business, media, and education. Furthermore, English is also used as the medium of instruction in private and public higher education throughout the country. Despite the development of English in Oman, English is considered as a foreign language since English is still used in limited domains of communication. According to Kutcher in his three-circled model of Englishes, that speakers of English are categorized into three groups, such as the inner circle, which includes the native speakers, such as people from the United Kingdom, United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, while the outer circle includes a number of second language speakers of English, such as those in India, Singapore, Philippines, and other countries where English is used as a second language. On the other hand, the expanding circle includes speakers for whom English is a foreign language, such as those in Japan, China, Korea, Oman, and other countries where English is a foreign language. In countries where English is widely spoken, speakers tend to use the nativized variety of English for intra-communication, which is seen to be more advantageous because speakers share similar linguistic and pragmatic knowledge about the variety of English used. English as a foreign language in Oman has played an important role in developing the learning of English among Omani learners. However, the use of English is somehow limited due to limited opportunities where English is spoken. Such limitation eventually influences the students' development in English language learning because the language is not enhanced outside the classroom. This study specifically investigates the teacher's beliefs as to what culture is deemed helpful in achieving a better learning experience of students studying English as a foreign language. To carry out this study, 20 non-native EFL teachers from Asian countries who have been teaching English in Oman were interviewed to explore which culture must be integrated in foreign language teaching. A diverse group of teachers coming from different cultural and linguistic backgrounds took part in the study that includes Filipinos, Indians, and Arab teachers. The interviews were conducted online for a period of 2 months from March 2019 until April 2019. All participants were asked to answer the questions through a Google form link, so it was conducted online. The interviews focused on the integration of culture in an English language class. Emphasis were given on the target culture, teacher's culture, and learner's culture, or what we call also as the local culture. Although the interviews were online, ongoing discussions were also done as a follow-up. The interviews collected were transcribed and analyzed using the thematic analysis that includes the teacher's beliefs, the target language culture, the language teacher's culture, and the language learner's culture. All interviews were coded and grouped the codes, and the codes were grouped according to themes, and the themes were layered. So generally, in analyzing the data, I used this thematic analysis. Based on the interviews conducted, the teacher's beliefs are categorized into 3, such as culture-centered learning is student-centered, localizes a second or foreign language, and encourages the use of authentic materials in the classroom. It is believed that culture-centered learning is student-centered. Foreign language teachers also believe that in order to make language learning more effective, then it must be student-centered. Integrating culture to language learning may result to student-centered focused kind of learning. Language learning should not be centered only to the language itself, but it must include how the learners understand and use the language appropriately. Consequently, classes become more engaging and students are getting more involved in class discussion and other activities. According to Weimer, that a learner-centered teaching engages students and encourages them to reflect on what they are learning and how they are learning it. In fact, one of the participants mentioned that, "I think my opinion is clear now, but classes should be student-centered and tailored towards their culture-based knowledge when possible. Of course, other cultures can be introduced, especially during listening or reading, but if possible, draw these topics back to their culture when producing language." Liddicote emphasized the importance of learners' understanding of their own culture and how their culture shapes their language structure and use. When learners fully understand their own language and culture, then it would be easy for them to explore and learn the culture of the target language. Another thing is that localizing the culture of a second or foreign language may help the learners to integrate their own culture to the target culture. It will help them to identify the similarities and differences of their own culture and the target language. Cultural integration in language learning is referred by the participants to the familiar culture of the learners. This means that language learning doesn't only occur through the culture of the language itself, but it has something to do with the familiar culture of the learners, which is their own culture. In a way, this is one method of localizing a foreign or a second language so that language can be fully felt and understood by the learners. And one of the participants said that integration of their culture helps improve it. Students can speak or write about the background knowledge with greater ease than they can in other cultures. Fluency practice shouldn't require students to learn new information. Instead, talk about subjects that they are familiar with. If I want students to practice with a target structure, I will choose situations they're familiar with. Likewise, if I'm asking students to write, I would expect them to refer their opinions and experiences, which inevitably stem from their own cultural backgrounds. Integrating culture in language learning encourages the use of authentic materials in language classroom. The use of authentic materials in the classroom is viewed as an effective tool in language learning. However, many reading sources and other teaching materials have preconceived ideas on what the learners are supposed to read and use where the learners could not relate. It is viewed by second or foreign language teachers as problematic because students may not understand the context. Learning a second or foreign language requires understanding the context to fully understand its actual use. Some of the participants are actually commenting on this. They said that the majority of English teaching materials assume a base knowledge of cultural items and ideas. And one of the participants also mentioned that having taught in the Middle East or Southeast Asia and East Asia, I have sometimes found this problematic. They also say that students have often overcome a cultural knowledge barrier as well as a language barrier with many English language teaching resources or course book. Many non-native English language teachers also believe that integrating culture in language teaching enhances the learner's intercultural competence. And in fact, one of the participants commented that many students learn to adjust to communicate to other people when culture is integrated in teaching English as a foreign language, and they can easily adjust when talking to native and non-native users of English. This diagram illustrates how communicative competence is achieved through intercultural language learning, where the learner's culture and the target culture and other cultures are mixed together when learners learn their own culture and at the same time learn the target culture and at the same time learn other cultures that would result to communicative competence. Non-native English language teachers also believe that integrating the learner's culture in language learning may help in developing a more student-centered language teaching. Developing cultural self-awareness is essential in achieving cross-cultural intellectual competence. When students are becoming familiar of their own culture, then eventually they develop a better understanding of their own cultures. According to Martin and Nakayama, they suggest that students be engaged in the practice of self-reflexivity, a process by which individuals come to understand themselves and their position in a society and learn to recognize the strengths and limitations of their own intercultural experiences. Putting the learner's culture as the core in language learning may transform classes to be more student-centered. In the interviews conducted, so the teachers commented that one of them said that I believe it is more important to integrate the learner's culture into language teaching. Other participants also said that if the language relates to students' interest and experience and knowledge they can draw on, they will be able to connect with the language more efficiently. And students are able to relate, thus they're able to express their ideas. It is also believed that culture-specific language teaching is also achieved when teachers integrate the learner's culture in language learning. Language teaching should always be culture-specific to the learner's culture. Celia argues that learning a language in isolation of its cultural roots prevents one from becoming socialized into its contextual use. Knowledge of linguistic structure alone does not carry with it any special insights into the political, social, religious, or economic system, or even insight into when you should talk and when you should not. The participants also mentioned that knowing the learner's customs, values, and communicative norms helps them to facilitate learning, and integrating language learners' cultures in class will help them use the language. The learner's schemata should always be considered. Non-native English language teachers also believe the importance of the target culture. They believe that integrating the target culture in a language classroom would be effective in language teaching. Studies have shown that learning the target culture helps in learning a second or foreign language, and it is believed that language learning requires the learners to learn the culture of the target language, when and how to use the language appropriately. In short, learners must develop an intercultural competence. Non-native English teachers believe that foreign language learners need to understand the target language culture, but have to be more familiar of the culture as to where the language be used. The participants of this study believe that the target language is important to be introduced when learners develop certain level of language proficiency. And one participant also commented that as an English language teacher, he believes that target culture is necessary so that learners can effectively communicate not just with people of their own culture, but for the native speakers too. Non-native English language teachers also believe that integrating the target culture in the language classroom may enhance foreign language learners' vocabulary and grammar. And in fact, they say that I could say that when students are introduced to the target culture, they begin to learn new vocabularies and eventually improve their grammar. And another participant said that integrating the target language culture helps the learners to be more aware whether the language that they learn is right or not. So it's just like the target culture becomes now the basis whether they are using the language appropriately and correctly. Introducing the target language culture in a language class may help the learners to familiarize the English speakers' idioms. What I am saying here is that they would be more familiar with the idiomatic expressions used by the native speakers. So there are so many idiomatic expressions that are not commonly used among foreign language learners in their own culture, and when they learn the target when they are familiar with the target language culture, then they would be more familiar also with the common idiomatic expressions that are used by native speakers. One participant of this research commented that there are some idiomatic expressions that are commonly used only by native speakers, and students learn the proper use of such idioms when they are introduced to the target language culture. One more thing which is also very important in integrating the target language culture in a language class is that it would allow your learner to become more culturally sensitive. Sensitive not just of their own culture, but also become sensitive on the culture of others. And when I say the culture of others, that would be the target language culture. One participant said that based on my experience, the integration of target language culture in class, especially in a foreign language class, provides students the opportunity to learn how the native speakers communicate, and it helps them to learn how to interact with other cultures. Knowing the target language culture may also help the learners to learn the culturally appropriate ways of speaking when using the target language. And the participants say that majority of my students will study and work in the Middle East, and they will be speaking English for work, mainly to Western and non-Western English speakers. Learning the target culture may help them to understand better when talking to different speakers of English. It is also very important to look at here the language teacher's culture, because the teacher is more exposed to students in the classroom. And in this study, we tried to look at also whether language teachers could be influential to students' learning. And based on the perceptions of the teachers, they believe that language teachers' culture would have less impact to students' learning. So they believe that teachers' own culture may not influence much, the students' learning. And some of the teachers commented that teachers sometimes impose their own culture in class, but I think this culture is the least important. And they also say that sometimes unconsciously they integrate their own culture as a teacher. And this is not common, but in a way perhaps it also contributes. But the contribution is not just, it's just a little, so not that much. They also believe that the language teacher's culture may establish good relationship with students. So perhaps this one would be the benefit of introducing the teacher's culture in the classroom. They believe that sometimes teachers could be a good tool to let your learners know about your background, including your cultural issues, and students will know how to communicate with you in class, and it somehow facilitates a better learning experience for students. The participants also believe that integrating language teachers' culture in the classroom could be a form of unconscious integration of culture. They say that sometimes language teachers unintentionally integrate their own culture in class. And they further say that we sometimes share our own views, interpretations, and understanding to our students, which are basically influenced by our individual culture. One participant from India said that, I'm from India and I sometimes interpret meaning differently from other teachers from the Philippines or in Oman, and that's how the teacher is actually sharing with the class. So by sharing his own perspective in the classroom, it's somehow already sharing or integrating his own culture to his class. So to conclude their findings of the study, I could say that teaching English as a foreign language requires teachers to expose students to various cultures to be more communicatively competent. So it is very important for you to allow your students to be familiar with different cultures, not just their own culture, but also the target culture and even the teacher's culture. English language teaching becomes more effective when it is culturally contextualized, because that is where they learn when and how the language will be used appropriately. And the use of authentic and cultural relevant materials are seen to be effective to foreign language learners. This is very essential because this is where the students would be able to relate to the materials that are used in the classroom. So if the materials that are used are culturally relevant to the learners, then the learners would easily understand, the materials that they are using or the materials that they are reading. So authentic materials is really essential in integrating culture in the classroom. Introducing the learner's culture, the teacher's culture, and the target culture is one way of exposing learners to intercultural communication, or we call now as global communication, and eventually develop the students or the learner's communicative competence. Intercultural language learning facilitates better learning and encourages teachers to be more student-centered. And it is always important to assess first the learner's needs before introducing them to a particular culture. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you for your time. Mahalo. And please let me know if you have some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Thank you, sir, for your informative talks this morning. Once again, on behalf of the conference and the delegates, we thank you. Now we shall proceed for the interaction session. Delegates are requested to just click the tab or the button that is given below this window, discussion live in Zoom. As you click it, you will be taken to the Zoom. There will have some 15 to 20 minutes interaction exclusively with the speakers. If anyone wants to clarify or add something, may do so discussing with the speakers of this morning. Later, we shall proceed for the paper presentation sessions. We have two parallel sessions today, and yesterday we had two parallel sessions, track 1 and track 2. Today we call them as track 3 and track 4. And as per the timetable served, those scheduled on track 3 will be presenting in the conference room number 1, and those who are scheduled in track 4 will be presenting in conference room number 2. And to enter into those rooms, you have to simply just click conference room 1, those who are scheduled there, that is track 3 delegates, and those who are scheduled in track 4 has to click conference room 2. And of course, we'll also give you some information on WhatsApp group so that you enter very easily. And this is for now, and we'll update you things on the Zoom and also in the further sessions. And with your cooperation, let's have a wonderful session. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. Thank you, madam, for your informative talks with full of content and knowledge. Thank you very much. Now we shall move on for the interaction session. We have to just click the tab or the button that is provided below, live discussion in Zoom. You click it, automatically you're taken it to the Zoom. There you can clarify, you can ask any doubt or add. You can directly speak to the speakers. For 20 minutes we'll spend, and 3:30 we will move on for paper presentations. We have Dr. Naresh Watts from Guru Gobind Singh Indraprastha University, who spoke yesterday to us, will be chairing one track, while Dr. Lata from KL University Guntur will be chairing the second track. And once we finish the presentations, again we shall all shift into Zoom by just clicking the provided tab or button below, and we can further interact with the paper presenters. And in final, there would be information shared concerned with conference publications and etc. And then with all your support and with your consent, we shall all take leave from this conference. Thank you all. Now we shall proceed for interaction session.